If you want to know what a political leader really values, you don't look at their speeches.
Right. Definitely not.
You look at their blueprints.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, words vanish the second they leave a
Yeah.
microphone, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But a 20,000 square foot room poured in concrete that tells a much more permanent story about power. So, welcome to the deep dive.
For you listening today, our mission is to unpack a really provocative recent article that looks at two completely different blueprints, one historical and one that's highly physically controversial.
Yeah, the piece we're looking at today is by Eric Reinhardt. It was published on May 19th, 2026, and it's titled The Architecture of a Secular Republic versus the Trump Palace.
Kitschy title.
It is, yeah. And it sets up this fascinating structural comparison. On one hand, Reinhardt analyzes Donald Trump's televised claims that America was legally founded on Christianity.
Right.
And on the other hand, he dissects the very real, very massive new White House Ballroom project that is currently driving, well, intense debate. And before we get into how the author connects those two dots, just a quick heads up for you listening. Reinhardt's article is a sharp, politically charged critique of Donald Trump.
Yes, absolutely. We need to be explicitly clear about that. Our goal today isn't to take a side, endorse his views, or, tell you what to think about the administration. We are just here to impartially pull apart the architecture of his argument.
Exactly.
We want to examine the historical and economic sources he cites and see exactly what kind of case he builds. We're basically operating as the building inspectors today, checking the math on the author's blueprints.
Okay, let's unpack this. Reinhardt opens by taking aim at a very specific, frequently repeated piece of rhetoric.
Right. He points to Donald Trump going on television and stating with absolute certainty that America was founded on Christianity.
And Reinhardt doesn't just disagree with this, right?
Yeah.
He treats it as a structural remodeling of history.
Yeah, and he brings out the foundational legal receipts to counter that claim immediately. He bypasses the cultural mood of the 1700s entirely.
Which is very different.
Exactly, and he goes straight to the legal framework, which is the Constitution itself. The text points out a glaring omission for anyone claiming a Christian founding. The document makes absolutely no mention of Jesus.
Wow, just none at all.
None. It establishes no national church. It does not put one specific religion in charge of the state.
So the author's making a compelling point that the founders didn't just forget to include Christianity. They were building a firewall.
They were engineering a deeply intentional system. Reinhardt breaks down the specific legal mechanisms the framers used to ensure this secular structure. Like Article 6 of the Constitution explicitly bans religious tests for holding public office.
Which is huge.
Right. Think about the mechanism there. It guarantees that a citizen's right to participate in their own government cannot be gated by their personal theology.
Right.
And then you have the First Amendment, which completely bars the federal government from establishing a religion while, simultaneously protecting the free exercise of faith.
It's a dual action mechanism. The founders didn't build a secular government to eliminate religion. They built it to protect religion from the government.
Exactly.
By ensuring the state couldn't pick a favorite church, they basically created a free market of faith.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is the founders didn't just quietly imply this secular framework in the background of domestic law. They actually declared it out loud in writing to the international community.
Oh, the treaty.
Yeah, Reinhardt anchors a major part of his historical argument on a specific diplomatic document, the Treaty of Tripoli from 1797.
That treaty is such a striking piece of evidence because of the era it was written in. I mean, it wasn't drafted centuries later. This was negotiated right in the crucible of the founding era.
Right. It provides incredible context. The United States was negotiating an agreement with a Muslim-majority state in North Africa. So the diplomatic imperative was to assure this foreign power that the U.S. was not a crusading Christian nationalist entity looking for a holy war.
That makes total sense.
So the government put it in plain language. The treaty was signed by President John Adams. It was read aloud on the Senate floor, and it was ratified unanimously by a U.S. Senate filled with actual founding fathers.
And the specific phrasing Reinhardt highlights leaves zero wiggle room. The treaty states, quote, "The government of the United States of America is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion."
Not in any sense.
Yeah.
The author leans heavily on those four words. The federal government officially declared to a foreign power that its structural foundation was entirely secular. Reinhardt uses this to demonstrate that the historical record fundamentally contradicts the modern rhetoric claiming a church charter.
The analogy that comes to mind reading this is the difference between a software company's terms of service and the flashy pitch a salesperson gives you.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, like the salesperson might tell you the software does magic, that it's built on pure intuition and reads your mind.
Sure.
But the terms of service, the strict, legally binding code, lays out exactly what the software is actually programmed to do. Reinhardt acknowledges that early American culture was heavily Christian. That was the pitch, the cultural mood.
Right.
But the legal framework, the terms of service, was explicitly secular.
Yeah, because the architects of that legal framework were heavily influenced by Enlightenment thinking. The text points out that key framers were deists and Christian deists.
Men who believed in a creator but had a deep, historically informed distrust of religious dogma being married to state power.
Exactly. They had just watched Europe tear itself apart for centuries over state-mandated religion. Their secular framework was a highly pragmatic invention to avoid importing those religious wars to a new continent.
Which brings us to the author's conclusion on the historical front. When Trump claims the founders built a Christian nation, Reinhardt argues he isn't engaging in historical analysis.
No, not at all.
He is executing a marketing campaign. He's selling a myth of a stolen religious inheritance, positioning himself as the strong man required to restore a foundation that never actually existed in the legal code.
And if a leader is willing to aggressively remodel the historical foundation of the country to suit a political narrative, it naturally invites the question of what they will do when they turn their attention to the physical foundation of the republic.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the author shifts from the rhetorical remodeling of the past to a literal physical remodeling project happening right now.
Yeah.
We are talking about the proposed addition to the White House, a massive, towering mega ballroom.
The physical specifics Reinhardt details are staggering. I mean, this isn't a minor renovation.
No.
The plans call for a new event space encompassing over 20,000 square feet.
That's huge.
It is. It's designed to accommodate roughly 1,000 guests at a time. And the projected costs are climbing into the hundreds of millions of dollars, navigating a maze of planning disputes and legal hurdles.
But wait, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate for a second. The White House hosts state dinners all the time, right?
Yeah.
Foreign dignitaries, massive diplomatic summits, cultural events.
True.
They've been putting up massive temporary tents on the lawn for decades to fit people. So why is the author treating a permanent new ballroom like it's some kind of architectural threat to the Republic instead of just a, highly practical upgrade?
Well, looking at my notes here, the author's critique really rests on the scale, the branding, and the intended psychological impact of the space.
Okay.
He argues this ballroom transcends functional utility. He describes it as a monument to spectacle. The White House was deliberately designed by George Washington and James Hoban to be a manor, not a palace.
Right.
It was meant to reflect the architectural humility of a republic, deliberately contrasting with the sprawling, opulent palaces of European monarchs.
It was built as the people's house, right? A temporary residence for a public servant, not a generational estate.
Exactly. And Reinhardt argues the new ballroom shatters that architectural humility. He notes that Trump continuously markets the project as the greatest, most beautiful ballroom the world has ever seen.
Yeah, that sounds like the branding.
Right. The danger, in the author's view, is the application of a permanent, hyper-personalized stamp on a public institution. By tacking a half-acre mega venue onto the executive mansion, Reinhardt argues it transforms the people's house into a venue engineered for a permanent coronation.
A permanent coronation.
Oh.
Wow. That phrase does a lot of heavy lifting.
It really does.
It highlights the shift from a space designed for democratic service to a space designed for monarchical display. It's about the underlying intention of the architecture.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author insists the true weight of this architectural critique can only be understood by looking at the timing.
The timing, yeah.
You have this massive, taxpayer-entangled monument to spectacle being planned inside the gates of the White House. But Reinhardt forces the reader to look at the macroeconomic reality occurring outside those gates.
And the juxtaposition the author creates here is brutal. He paints a picture of two entirely different American realities operating in parallel.
Yes.
Inside the gates, the focus is on architectural renderings, grand scale, and legacy. Outside the gates, everyday families are staring down receipts, not renderings.
Right. The author focuses on the specific economic pressures eroding the middle class. We are looking at the compounding loss of purchasing power.
Which is something you're seeing everywhere.
Everywhere. Reinhardt points to the climbing prices of highly inelastic goods, things people cannot simply choose not to buy: food, shelter, and energy. When inflation hits those specific sectors, it acts as a highly regressive tax.
It's just like watching a corporate CEO draw up blueprints for a solid gold executive dining room while simultaneously telling the factory floor that their wages are frozen and the cafeteria is raising prices.
That's exactly it. And the macroeconomic squeeze is particularly devastating for people on fixed incomes, a demographic Reinhardt explicitly highlights. When the cost of unavoidable necessities surges, and fixed income adjustments lag behind the real-world cost of living, these individuals aren't just treading water. They are actively losing real wealth.
Wow.
Their standard of living is being structurally downgraded while hundreds of millions are being debated for a vanity project.
You know, the author's framing here is incredibly clarifying. He strips away the high-level philosophical debates.
He does.
For everyday Americans dealing with this squeeze, the defining choices of their week aren't theoretical arguments over a secular versus a Christian founding. The choices are tactile and punishing.
Very punishing.
They're choosing between groceries versus rent. They're weighing the cost of gas against the cost of their prescriptions.
Yeah.
They're calculating whether spending time with their kids is worth missing a shift at a second job.
And Reinhardt uses that stark contrast to anchor his entire critique. He is illustrating a massive structural disconnect.
Right.
The administration's priority is building a palace, while the immediate pressing requirement of the republic is basic economic stability.
So what does this all mean? We have these two seemingly totally separate tracks. On one side, we have a leader rhetorically rewriting the historical blueprints of the founders to claim a religious mandate.
Yeah.
On the other side, we have a literal physical blueprint for a 20,000 square foot mega ballroom being bolted onto the White House during a cost of living crisis. How does Reinhardt synthesize these into a single unified warning?
Well, Reinhardt's central thesis is that both actions are a tell. They reveal the underlying psychology of the leadership. The argument is fundamentally about boundaries.
Boundaries, okay.
If a leader demonstrates a willingness to rewrite the foundational historical reality of the country simply to sanctify his own political brand, it proves he does not respect structural limits.
Right.
And if he doesn't respect historical limits, he certainly won't hesitate to rewrite the present physical reality and spend vast sums of public resources to justify his own indulgences.
The author brings this home with an incredible mirroring metaphor. I love how he structures this climax. He argues that the administration is actively turning the United States Constitution into a sermon it was never written to be, while simultaneously turning the people's house into a personal venue it was never built to become.
It's a brilliant synthesis. Reinhardt takes the abstract concept of constitutional law and the tactile reality of concrete and steel and demonstrates how both are being warped by the exact same autocratic instinct.
Yeah.
It is the instinct to replace public inheritance with personal ownership.
Absolutely.
This raises an important question about the final destination of this kind of leadership. The author points back to the framers of the Constitution one last time to issue his concluding warning.
What's the warning?
He acknowledges the founders were flawed men, but he emphasizes that they successfully drew a bright, vital line in the legal code. They established no state religion, they required no religious tests, and they built a government designed to fiercely protect belief without ever attempting to own it.
And Reinhardt's ultimate warning is that crossing that historical line while physically building a palace fundamentally shrinks the American identity.
He describes a deeply regressive future. The author warns that this combination of historically inaccurate religious rhetoric and monarchical architecture drags the country towards something much smaller than a pluralistic republic.
Wow.
He envisions a state increasingly wrapped in one specific faith, dominated by one man, and physically centered in one grand room. A political environment where civic value and loyalty are no longer measured by democratic participation, but simply by invitations and applause in a ballroom.
You know, unpacking this article is exactly why we do these deep dives. For you listening, whether your primary interest is constitutional history, macroeconomic trends, or architectural theory, Reinhardt's piece is a masterclass in seeing how these disciplines intersect.
It really is.
It trains you to recognize how political rhetoric about our past and massive physical projects in our present are rarely just coincidences. They're often deeply intertwined tools of persuasion and power. It's about developing the critical eye required to look past the flashy marketing pitch and examine the actual structural blueprints of what a leader is trying to build.
Definitely. And I'll leave you with this. Reinhardt warns us about the mindset behind building this mega ballroom. But consider the long-term physical legacy. Winston Churchill once said, "We shape our buildings. Thereafter, they shape us."
Oh, that's a great quote.
Right. If this 20,000 square foot monument to spectacle is completed, how might it shape the behavior of future presidents? Once a space designed for a coronation is permanently built into the architecture of a republic, does it subtly change the expectations of every single leader who inherits it, forever blurring the line between a presidency and a monarchy?
That is exactly the kind of question that changes how you look at the physical structures of power. A massive thank you to you for joining us as we explored the blueprints today. Keep looking closely at the world around you, and we will catch you on the next Deep Dive.